Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. Today, we're back with the sixth entry in our 3 films that got you through the 2020 pandemic interview series. And for those of you tuning in for the first time, in this series, I am speaking with a wide variety of friends, colleagues, and professionals working in the film industry, largely in my backyard of Oklahoma. I'll be speaking with each guest about how the pandemic has impacted their line of work before talking about the 3 films that helped them get through it all. Today, I'll be speaking with writer, filmmaker, and host of the Hardcourt Honeys podcast, Shea Vassar. I'll speak with Shea about how the pandemic impacted her work as a freelance entertainment writer and her coverage of international film festivals like Sundance. And then we'll wrap up the conversation by talking about the 3 films that helped her get through it all. Before we jump into today's show, I just wanted to quickly note that if you enjoy our interview today, please consider leaving us a rating and a review and a follow or a subscribe on your preferred podcast app. In particular, if you're on Apple Podcasts, because this is the most impactful way that you can support the show at this time. And I'd also like to encourage all of you to participate in this series along with us. One way you can do that is by emailing us your 3 film selections to our email, thecinematropolis@gmail.com. You can also share your picks by following us on Twitter at The Cinematrop or on Facebook at facebook.com/thecinematropolis. You can drop us a note there as well. Send us your picks to have a chance to have them heard on this show. Now, what do you need to know about today's guest, Shea Vassar? Well, Shea actually came to me from a couple of recommendations from other members of the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, and according to her website, Shea Vassar is a Cherokee Nation citizen and member of the Native American Journalists Association. Her film criticism career started as something to do to pass the time in film school at Hunter College, and has since been published at Roger Ebert, High Country News, Film School Rejects, and Zora Magazine, among many others. Currently, she is working with the Red House Project and is dedicated to bringing authentic Native representation to the screen. Shea is also a Master of Legal Studies student at the University of Oklahoma, where she is specifically studying Indigenous Peoples law. And when not talking about movies, she's also co-hosting a podcast called Hardcourt Honeys, which is a bi-weekly show that really discusses all things NBA. So, as you can tell, Shea has a pretty wide range of talent here that she's sharing, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's film criticism, or talking basketball. She has a lot of really exciting perspective to bring, in particular in the realm of Native representation in film and pop culture. Now, I have to confess, listener, this interview is actually my first time speaking with Shea, and I've got to say, she really has a positive and excited energy about her, and an undeniable knowledge about film and basketball. In this conversation, it really came with a few surprises, including more love for Diego Luna than I've ever shared on any podcast. But clearly, as you'll hear in the conversation, it certainly won't be the last time. But without further ado, let's go ahead and move into our conversation with Shea Vassar. We're so excited to be joined by another special guest today, Shea Vassar, writer, filmmaker, and host of the Hardcourt Honeys podcast. Shea, such a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, I have to ask the question. You know, we're sitting here in late February conducting the interview, but 2020, we're still, it's not too far behind us. How was the year for you, and how are you doing today?
You know, the new normal has been difficult to adjust to, but at least it is better now that we are almost a year into this social distancing quarantine. But I've had my ups and downs. I'm sure like other people where some days I'm like, oh, yay, I get to stay home. And then other days I'm like, oh, no, I have to stay home. So it's a process, but I'm making it through.
We're glad that you can make it through for the interview today. And you have done a lot of really awesome stuff in terms of like writing for film publications and filmmaking, and you've dabbled in a lot of different things. I want to hone in here on the film publication piece. So you've written for Film School Rejects, RogerEbert.com, Sierra Magazine, among many others. One thing that stuck out to me is that you're often writing stories covering Indigenous or Native perspectives. I'm just thinking about this in the context of early 2021, post 2020, the world we're in right now. Why do you think it's so important to focus on those perspectives, especially through the lens of this post-pandemic world we're in right now?
The film industry has long centered only narratives that are told by a white male perspective. And it's not even saying that that's necessarily bad perspective. It's just we need to diversify that. And we're seeing a shift in the industry where more inclusivity is happening, and that is so great, but that includes having authentic storytellers being the ones who get to tell their stories. So we're seeing a real push for this. And again, everything that happened in 2020, gratefully with the Black Lives Matter movement, this conversation is being brought to the center of just narratives. And also, there was a lot of building up to this moment with even Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement. So now we're in a position where we are kind of picking and choosing who has the autonomy to tell a story. So when it comes to Native storytelling, for so long, Native characters or Native plot lines have been used to propel a white protagonist forward. And we don't need that anymore. And again, not saying that the films where those where that was done is necessarily bad. I mean, 2020 was the first year that I watched Dances with Wolves just because it's so long. It's a drama. Wasn't really on the forefront of my list of movies I really wanted to watch, but I did while I had the time. And I'm not saying it's a bad film. It is technically done so beautifully. The cinematography is wonderful. The screenwriting is really, you can see the depth, but we don't need a, that was good for the 90s. That was good for 1990 when it came out. But we are currently in a very similar spot when it comes to Native representation that we were in 1990, where a lot of these characters are just kind of subplots. And I say that knowing that there's a entire Native filmmaking and Indigenous filmmaking renaissance that is happening. I mean, us being in Oklahoma, we know about it a little bit more than some of the other spots, but it's like it's about to erupt, and we're going to have such an overwhelming amount of just Indigenous content, and that is so exciting. But it also means that we need to create that space so that people are ready and are also ready to be, instead of it being like yay Indigenous content and rating it an A+, we look at it with a lens that is ready to be critical and also continue to bring in just change in this industry that's kind of been in the same spot for the 100 years that it's existed.
Yeah, for sure. This is an opportunity for the narrative to shift. Earlier in the series, we talked about. I talked with Sterling Harjo about a related topic, and he was saying we've had representation, but it's not been accurate representation.
Right.
Even if it's representation, nonetheless. From your perspective, where would you like to see that go? Like as part of the larger conversation in film?
Well, I watch a lot of movies and television, not just as a critic, but as, just I love storytelling. And one thing that I've really noticed is how heavy a lot of these Native or Indigenous centered stories are. So, really, my goal is to continue to where it's like we and when I say we, I mean like Native creatives are able to pitch Native centered rom coms, Native centered just comedies in general, but where it's not just focusing on Indigenous pain, because a lot of, even right now, the Native made content is focusing more on like a negative Native experience. And I get it because our communities are so full of trauma that it does inform everything we do. But why can't we have I would love, like, one of my goals would be to have kind of like a Broad City, but with two Native women who just run around doing funny stuff, and we laugh about it because that show uses humor to address certain topics, and it's not traumatizing. Like, I don't watch that show and walk away and I'm like, wow, I have to really think about the heaviness on that. I'm able to watch the same episode again and again and again, laugh at it every time, have the same lesson, and it hits me in a different way. And so that's my goal for native content is I think right now we really do have an opportunity to process on screen, and that is vital. That is also vital. And those stories are just as important, but we also need to create space for indigenous joy on screen. And that's the thing I'm looking most forward to, is once we get into that phase of native filmmaking.
Right, right. Now that's super exciting, and it's like it's baby steps. The progress is slow, but it is looking promising. It sounds like. So I did want to talk a little bit about how Hollywood, the shutting down of Hollywood, rather, really impacted the industry, particularly you as a film writer. So did that impact A, the type of work available, but B, the types of things you wrote about?
Definitely. And the biggest change would be I I covered the Toronto International Film Festival in September, completely virtual, which while sometimes I was like, cool, I can wear my pajamas and sit on the couch and watch this new movie. Other times I forget how great it is to be in a cinema with other people and have that collective experience. And film festivals are really different because as a critic, you go in and you're in the same room. Again, it's usually a pretty big room if it's a theater, but you're in the same room as some of the people in the industry that you look up to, or you notice faces and you're like, wow, that's I'm trying to think, but like Richard Brody, I've been to a screening where Richard Brody was sitting there, and I was like, wow, that's Richard Brody, that's so cool. And so there's a certain just like camaraderie that happens there. And then, when you step away from the theater after you just saw a movie with someone, you're able to go grab a coffee or grab a cocktail before going into another movie. And you have that community. Doing TIFF virtually was very hard because I I was just sitting at my desk or at my couch and just watching these movies, and then we were supposed to go to Zoom meetings, and that's not fun. Like, that doesn't it's not the same experience. So it was hard to really want to review films for a festival. And and then while you also had that aspect of it, you had less big releases at these festivals. So same with like Sundance, which just passed, and I also covered it virtually. That was after I came to New York, so I was watching it just on my little computer screen, and I'm like, this is not how I should be watching these films. Like, and Sundance did a beautiful job presenting them to us, but it was just not the same experience as going to Park City. And I say that as someone who hasn't been to Park City. This was my first Sundance, and I wasn't there in the snow. And again, shaking hands with like some of the biggest name actors and directors, and then being with my other film critic friends. So the camaraderie wasn't quite there, and there's no way to change that this quickly in the industry. So it also affected the way that I just wanted to write, because I just wanted to watch so many movies and then didn't want to write about any of them. So it was hard to pitch because it's like, budgets are lower, or oh well, we're not focusing on that right now, or so it was just kind of hard when you have a question mark in the future of an industry, or if a title's even going to be released when it says it will. It's just been that has been a really hard time adjusting. But thankfully, I do have a good support system within the industry where we have a group message or a group chat, and we talk every day, and both the good and the bad of what's going on in our little film criticism world. But and we do like happy hour nights and stuff, and that helps because while we can't have the camaraderie in person, we have been able to adjust. And so it's good to hear that I'm not the only one, because for a while I thought I was the only writer struggling to pitch and then, want to write about cinema. I'm like, have I lost my passion? Like I had this whole existential thing, and then a lot of my friends are like, no, we're having the same thing because we don't know what to write about, or we don't know if that movie's going to be released, and we don't want to watch these screeners on our laptops or our iPads. So it's just a shift in the industry, and we are seeing it come back, and Sundance was a really good sign of that.
Yeah, no, I can super relate. Virtual film festivals, and we've spoken very highly of our local Dead Center Film Festival, and like it's nice that they exist, but at the same time, there is I think there is like a certain sacredness to seeing a movie in the theater where you get like an experience you just can't have on your couch, but B, also in the film festival world, like that you talk about the coffee or the cocktails between movies, like that almost gives you energy, and you're talking about the movie you just saw, it gets you more fired up, so it's a lot easier to write about things, I'm sure. And that is certainly, it feels a little more like a homework assignment and less part of like an experience, maybe. I guess I don't know if that's accurate for you.
Definitely, because especially now that I'm doing like virtual school for my master's, it's essentially the same thing where I'm like, I'm sitting at my desk, I look at a screen, I write about it. And then that's the same thing I do with my film writing, which usually it's a different experience if I'm going to even like a smaller screening, or you get with your friends and watch a movie and then discuss it or something like that. It's been a whole different. So yeah, comparing it to homework is very accurate. And I am not good at getting my homework in on time. So that's how you know about my deadlines too. Those have been a little late too.
Hey, you know what? Some say. In fact, I just spoke with someone today who said their best work happens on a deadline. I'm not saying that's the healthiest way to live, but for some people, it works. Obviously, there were some changes in the way you're watching movies. Follow up question here: did you notice a shift in the types of articles that were being selected by editors or people who are actually making the calls about what sorts of content they published?
Yeah, so right when the pandemic started, there was actually a really great document that just a lot of freelance, either culture writers or any kind of art critic, they created, where a lot of the publications that we had all pitched at or had the contacts to, they were all in like a shared Google sheet, where it was like, here's people who are not currently taking pitches because, the pandemic has really slimmed out a lot of these budgets in an industry that is already, you don't have those kind of jobs that I thought as a kid being a writer you're going to have, where it was either sitting in a TV writing room, or being a journalist where I had to go like investigate and go back to the office, and like that doesn't exist anymore. And I get why financially a lot of publications have switched to just freelance, because you can pay a little bit less, you can, forget the health insurance and all of that. But for someone that freelances, it's also a very scary time, because this idea of having consistent work is all about how much effort you put in. And some days, actually, like some weeks, I just don't want to put any effort in, but you have to. And so it was good to have, again, that camaraderie that happened, where all of us from different, whether it was New York or LA or somewhere in between, we could look at this and be like, no, they're like currently not accepting pitches, and they've been very vocal about it. Or, and some of this too was like, if other people got responses from someone that was like, no, we've just slashed our budget for the next 4 months, they would put that in the notes. And that way we knew not to waste our time, because pitching can be a very tedious situation, especially when you're still creating connections, or if you're wanting to branch out to new publications. So I've been very, very grateful that I have a set monthly column over at Film School Rejects, and that has kind of helped me, to where when I don't want to pitch, I'm still getting content or writing every month, because I have that, and I love that column a lot, and it's something that I put a lot of time and effort into. But a lot of the things that I put there are things that I would have pitched, say, a year ago before I had that column. And I am so thankful I'm not pitching these things, because it's even before the pandemic, it was very hard to get editors to understand that what I was writing was going to be successful. And I know this is a super long-winded answer, but I one of the pieces that helped me create a little bit of a niche in the industry is I wrote about the native representation in Parasite, and I pitched that from like October till December, and I got so many rejections because people just weren't interested on any kind of negativity on Parasite. And I wasn't none of my pieces I will ever say like that film is outright terrible or that film is outright great. I like to kind of play devil's advocate and put in details that maybe people hadn't thought of. And it's like a theory, right? So sometimes like I don't even 100% agree with it, but it's whatever my theory is, I'm putting it out there so that we can use cinema as the art form that it is and really think about things critically. And so I just got turned down from so many people and I almost gave up because I was just sick of pitching it, but I just wanted to write it so bad. And I'm definitely the kind of person that needs a little bit of a green light if I'm going to put in a lot of effort into a piece instead of writing it beforehand. And I finally got the green light from Zora magazine. And that piece still is, I still get emails about it. I've been, people find me on Twitter because they're like, I read this. I had someone message me and was like, I used this piece in a film class. Like I cited you. And I was like, oh, don't do that. I'm not that, like that piece isn't that good. But I was also very honored. I won't lie. And that piece has almost hit like 100,000 views and it's only a little over a year old now. And so I knew that this piece was needed because anytime you looked up on Twitter, like native Parasite, it was people either agreeing, dissecting, or they hated the way that it was represented in the film. And because that film was being so talked about, I was like, I need to write this piece. And I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity. But since then, like that was pre-pandemic, and so I mean, I pitched over 25 publications. So post-pandemic, I can't even imagine what that would have been like if you had put Parasite's release like a year later. I don't think anybody would have emailed me back. It was a very hard thing to pitch, and pitching just is going to continue to get harder as finances get thinner.
I really like how you frame that too. It's not necessarily about agreeing or disagreeing with the statement. It's saying, hey, should we stop and talk about this? Is this something worth considering about this movie? That's especially for movies that are, being heralded as like the second coming of, whatever.
Exactly.
I think that it just further goes to show that when publications, sometimes take risks, it can pay off. And also, I think it just really highlights the power of cinema overall, and like the power in cinema is often the conversations that happen around it. You've already talked a little bit about how things shifted and how the types of articles that got selected shifted. You personally, how did you adapt to the changes in 2020 in terms of the ways that you covered film via writing and podcasting or video? We haven't even mentioned the fact that you do the Hardcore Honeys podcast, which is again a podcast, so it's a pivot when you're having to do it remotely, right?
Very much so. And I mean, when it comes to writing, thankfully the idea of freelance writing again has shifted so much prior to 2020 that the other than the actual pitching part and being accepted and having the green light for pieces you want to write, the idea of a lot of us being virtual in these communities, we're somewhat used to. And that's what made film festivals so fun, is because you would meet via Twitter, which I always sound like such a nerd when I say that, but you meet via Twitter and you love someone's writing, and they're like, oh, are you going to New York Film Festival? And it's like, heck yeah, I'm gonna be there, and then we get to be actual friends. And so you meet people like that, and then they go back to say Toronto, and then you meet again next year, and so it creates that excitement. And so because of that, that's why this adaptation has been so easy, because we've already somewhat been doing this virtually for so long. I have so many editors that I've never even talked to like via Zoom, like it's all email or Slack, or you know what I mean? So it's like that was the easy part. it's definitely finding the motivation when you don't have like the structure of just life. And when I was in New York, I mean, we were stuck in a one bedroom apartment, and my fiance and I don't have a car, and so we literally did not leave the city for, oh my goodness, we didn't even leave our neighborhood for like 6 or 9 months. And finally we rented a car and we took like a day trip upstate, and did like a social distance day trip, because we were like, if we don't do it now, we're gonna go Jack Torrance on everyone, aka me and him, because that was everyone. And so like it makes it hard when that's like your day to day and you're losing, like, I don't know what day of the week it is. I don't know, because you can't even look forward to, say, like, I don't know, like a Saturday night meal out at a restaurant, because that's not even a thing. And so when your days go together, and just finding the motivation to like sit and think about a movie, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's the last thing I want to do. I for a while I was watching really trashy reality TV. So I watched like all of Dance Moms because I had never watched it before. I don't recommend that for anyone, because my lack of just like everything for a while just went away. I was like a biggest couch potato, stuck in like 2000 and what, like 17, watching Dance Moms. I that was not a good part of my pandemic experience. So I finally was like, I need to get back on it, and that's when I pitched my column idea to Film School Rejects, who I had done a couple of pieces with before, and so that helped, is putting that structure back in. Again, it's only once a month, but also just like being kind of understanding with myself and with others that I mean, the pandemic is a collective trauma. This, whether or not you know someone that has passed or has had difficulties, I mean, the loss of even our day to day as humans is such a loss that we also have to mourn. And so I started having a little bit more compassion for myself and then my other writers who, like me, they had lost their day jobs. So before the pandemic, I had a temporary job in an office and also a weekend barista job, and both of those went away. And so you just have that structure that is lost. So it's kind of, in a way, you can look at it and be like, hey, so what would I do if I didn't have this structure in place, or if I didn't have the idea of conventional like 9 to 5 job? But also it sucks because I still got to pay my bills. Like I still have to pay rent. I still have to pay for my utilities. So that motivation, like how do you motivate yourself to make sure that just your basic needs are taken care of? So again, just having friends that can jump on a Zoom call with you for a morning coffee complaining session really helps. But I've been really lucky that this industry, specifically in the film industry, has been remote for a long time. So we just had to give up the fun parts of seeing each other in person every now and then.
Sure, sure. And you mentioned there that you shifted to watching some reality television. I am kind of curious, like overall, was there a big change in the types of movies you were drawn to writing about during the pandemic?
Yeah, and that's why I watch, oh my goodness, I watch like almost every reality TV show except for The Bachelor, because I will not watch that. But I watch like all the others, like Love Island Australia, Catfish. I'm currently watching, when I'm not watching movies, I'm currently working through Jersey Shore. So obviously my way of coping is watching reality TV. So this this is something I figured out during the pandemic. I never liked reality TV before now, and now I can't stop it. So, but when it comes to writing about movies, it was much easier before the pandemic for me to write and digest films, specifically looking for that native representation. Just because, again, I have my regular coping skills of like going out with my friends, or even going to a movie, like, even if I wasn't writing about it, just the act of going to a movie, going to a coffee shop. But once the pandemic hit and I have this column, I realized how much energy um, writing about, like, my most recent one was spending a whole day researching and then a whole day also writing about the history of scalping. And you're like, wow, this is really heavy, because once you have kind of some of those cushions in your life that I definitely took for granted until they disappeared. It was just kind of like everything weighed on me even more and even more, because I didn't have that escape or that way to break from more heavy topics. So I got to write about some horror films for Sundance, and that was great because I actually started out writing about horror. That was actually, so some people like don't know that I'm a horror fan first and foremost, and so I'll like say something about it, and they're like, "Wow, I didn't know that you know so much about '80s like genre." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's how I started. Is I actually wanted to talk about like representation in horror films, and I just kind of found my niche elsewhere, and that was only because it outside of an academic circle, there's not a lot of writing about Native representation. So I just kind of found an area that I like and was able to offer some insight. But yeah, if I can watch like slasher films every day, like that is my thing. Like that, I love a good old like slasher. Like 80s 90s slasher is my favorite, and so anytime that my fiance would want to turn on like a drama, I was like, ew, no, I want blood and guts. And he's like, we watched that the last 5 nights. Like, can we watch like, something a little bit more like content? And I'm like, no, more blood and guts. Like, which is again, like I didn't want to do anything serious for a long time. And so, I found myself, I rewatched all the Star Wars films in order. I had kind of fun with it, kind of having an excuse to watch films that might be, I don't know, looked down upon, even though I don't think I agree with the whole rhetoric of looking down on any kind of film. I'm a big Star Wars fan too, so I'm definitely not saying those films are looked down on. So yeah, it definitely has changed the way that I approach topics. And it overall, I have been stretched as a writer, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, of course, I wouldn't want a pandemic to happen again so I can become a better writer, but I mean, silver lining, I guess.
Sure, sure. I mean, you gotta take the positives where you get it, and I mean, like, I think for a lot of people in the film industry or just in general, figuring out how to adapt, the people who have been able to figure it out, hopefully are coming out stronger again as like a silver lining, I guess. I wanted to shift gears here a little bit because another big part of what you do is hosting the Hardcore Honeys podcast. And I want to frame it this way because I find it interesting. For many people, I think especially for those of us who are living in the state of Oklahoma, where the cinematic schematic is based out of, the moment when the Thunder versus Jazz game was postponed way back in almost a year ago in March of 2020 was a big wake up call. So I'm curious, like, how did the year that was 2020 impact how you watched and talked about things, even like basketball?
So, fun fact, I was actually at that game. So, I had flown into Oklahoma from New York. I had actually gone as press to the OKC Knicks game the Friday before at Madison Square Garden. Of course, OKC won because, poor Knicks. But so I went to that and I was super stoked that I was going to 2 Oklahoma City games in like less than a week. My sister lives in Tulsa, so I actually flew into Bentonville Airport. I drove to Tulsa. We drove then to Oklahoma City, and because we're sisters and we were talking, we were actually running really late. And I wasn't on my phone at all, so I didn't know any of the stuff. So we're getting there right as the sun is setting, and it's beautiful. And I'm like, we got to hurry up because like the beginning is so fun because it was her first NBA game. And when we're walking up, a guy stops us and is like, "You don't want to go in there." And we're like, "Okay." We just thought he was being an idiot and like saying stuff to us. And we're like, "Yeah, right. Like we have tickets." And he was like, "No, you don't want to go in there." And I was like, really confused. he finally explained to us that like Rudy Gobert is the Jazz player that most likely has COVID, and that they got sent back to the locker room. And then my sister was like, "Oh, well, we're driving back to Tulsa." And I was like, "Well, let's go get pizza or something." And I was like, "Are you sure you don't want to go in and just see what it looks like inside?" She was like, "Go in and see coronavirus." Like she was so not having it. So yeah, that was when I was also like part of that wake up call where, oh, this might be something we need to take really serious, because for a while we were hearing it wasn't going to affect the United States. At that moment, I was like, yeah, it's going to affect the United States because it just canceled the NBA. And that's like big, because if the NBA is going to shut down, then like this isn't just I don't know, a small thing. So that was interesting because as an NBA fan, NBA has been my break away from watching cinema. Because again, I love movies, but it's very hard for me to watch a movie and not constantly be analyzing it. So it's nice to sometimes watch a basketball game with a beer and literally turn my brain off and just focus on that game. It's one of the greatest things ever. And so having that taken away during the beginning of the quarantine was, again, probably attributed to my reality TV binging. But it also made me so grateful when the NBA came back and did the bubble. So I, being bored and not really knowing what to do, and movies being a little bit delayed, I like started a podcast I called it Bubble Play with Shea. And then I was hoping it would spur off into something more consistent and not just me hosting it, because I was like, I don't know how to do this and edit and all. I went to film school, but I didn't pay attention during like the sound editing part. So I finally got a message from Jade from Hardcore Honeys, and they were like, we're actually looking for another like woman, like another NBA fan to be on our podcast, and you seem perfect. So I did the trial, and since then they've been some of my best friends. So the format of it is where Taylor, he is in Minnesota, he's a Timberwolves fan, and he comes up with the questions and he interviews Jade and I like we are the experts. And it kind of flips the script on normal sports journalism, where it's usually women asking the men. Obviously, that's changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but it's still heavily male dominated in that industry. So it's fun for us to be the official. And so we're all small market teams. You have, like I said, Taylor with the Timberwolves. Jade is right outside Toronto, so she's a Raptors fan. And then I'm Oklahoma City. So it's fun to have our opinions from smaller teams, right now not so great teams, and we have fun with it, and we kind of push buttons on purpose with people who like love LeBron and Lakers fans and all of that, and it's a great thing to have an outlet outside of movies, because once movies become your work, they're no longer the exact outlet anymore. And I'm okay with that. I try to warn people who are like, I want to start doing what you're doing. I'm like, no, you have to be ready to not have movies as your outlet anymore, because you're all of a sudden like, why is the lighting like this? Well, that wasn't consistent. And it is so hard to turn that part off. So NBA has really, really been my pride and joy. And when that bubble came back and we were having like 4 games a day, I would watch all 4. I loved it. And so I'm really happy to have the NBA, and NBA and movies are like my 2 things. So
both tragically missing for part of 2020, but with the bubble, which again, kudos to the NBA, because not all sports associations took it that seriously, and thus had to close stuff down again. So kudos to the NBA, but I am very glad for you. Not a basketball person, but I like that it's around. I like that I can catch the highlights. I like that I still have like small Zoom chats with my coworkers at my day job about the Thunder. So it's just really nice. It's pleasant, and that's the sort of stuff that kind of like helps us all, kind of reminds everyone that we're all kind of living in the same city or the same town, or so it's been good to have it back for sure. And listeners, make sure to check out her podcast. It's some really good stuff. I checked out a couple episodes, and not a basketball guy, but I did find the conversation and banter to be a lot of fun. Shea, we're about to move into the second part of our interview here, but first, before we do, I want to talk a little bit about how 2021 is looking comparative to last year. Are things looking up? Are they about the same, or are they looking entirely different for you?
Well, they are looking up. If all things go as planned, this is not work related, but I should be getting married in October, which again, if it ends up being virtual, it'll be a Zoom link. So, we can have 10,000 people. Actually, I don't know if Zoom allows 10,000 people, so I'm not going to extend the invitation to the world. But, so I've been working on that, and I love planning things. And I love not spending money. So I'm trying to spend as little money as possible and have the most fun. So that's my personal news. But already I feel very confident.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, he proposed right before I came to Oklahoma. And so he'll be coming to Oklahoma in 10 days for the first time. So I'm excited to introduce him to Oklahoma things. Yeah, it'll be fun. But then writing wise, like I said, Sundance has been, it was a really great experience. Again, it was still a virtual festival, but Sundance really put a great expectation on future virtual festivals just because it was organized. There was great communication. It was easy to access. And so I liked covering a festival like that. And, as time goes on, I hate admitting this, but there might be a need for more virtual festivals from now on, even in a post-COVID world, just because it is pretty easy. I mean, you can have more people access it who might not be able to, say, travel. And that I really liked. And then, I have had some opportunities and just reaching out with other people. I've been on a lot of podcasts, which is great because, again, I'm a podcaster, but I also love to talk. So as an extrovert who is still not able to go into big crowds of people, podcasts have been a great way for me to reach out to other people, reach out to different communities and talk, which is something I love doing. So, but yeah, things are definitely looking up, and I have good expectations for 2021. And I feel like no one says that anymore unless they really mean it, because after we were all like, yeah, 2020 is the year, and a couple months in, it got shut down. We keep those expectations very realistic nowadays, but I do have good expectations for the rest of the year.
Well, very cool. Earlier in the series, I spoke with Alex Picard Davis, who had talked about how essentially what you're saying is basically they can't do a Dead Center Film Festival again without the virtual component because it was so successful and the feedback was so positive and people from around the world were able to watch it. So, I mean, it sounds like, coming out of the pandemic, and it sounds like you agree that the virtual component of a lot of these, at least the major film festivals, is going to stick around. So very excited to see what that looks like. Well, congratulations again on the big news. We're going to shift it even further into the personal notes here because I want to talk to you about 3 different films that you selected that helped get you through the especially challenging year that was 2020. And I'm excited to hear exactly what all you picked. Now, of course, these 3 films are not ranked in any particular order. So with that note, what is the first film that you've selected for us today?
So when I first started thinking about this, the first one that came to mind was Blood Quantum by Jeff Barnaby.
So how long were you out there for?
I lost track of the time.
Did you get bit?
This planet we're on is so sick of our shit. That's why the dead keep coming back to life.
You're immune. I'm not. What if my baby isn't either?
Run!
It was very timely that this was released during a pandemic. The movie is it's an indigenous zombie film about kind of a disease going on that Native people are just not, like, they don't get the zombie disease. So that was fun. And again, blood and guts are my thing. So it was fun to watch blood and guts and native actors. Like, you get both in one. So I watched that several times, and that's my number one. Again, non-ranked, but number one.
I mean, so that's like
Yes.
a Shea Vassar special. You get all the things you like in one movie.
Well, yeah, I love seeing also like native creatives that are able to break out of like a trauma story. Because, like, again, Barnaby knows how to handle some of the issues, but then it's funny. There's tons of again, blood and guts, special effects, good acting. So that all in one, like, it's not your typical just kind of like sad drama. It is gory, and I loved it.
For listeners out there who might not be familiar, was this a film that came out last year, or did you have a previous history with it?
No, so it came out, and I want to say April of 2020. So again, this is back when, we were starting to realize that this was not just a month or couple week thing. So the release happened where I think they were supposed to have a limited release in theaters. It just went immediately to Shudder, the horror movie streaming site. And so that was cool that if you're going to use a pandemic and people sitting at home to your advantage, there's definitely a way to do that. And so this film was definitely it. And I know a lot of different people said something similar, where it was like, it was perfect timing for us kind of sitting and not knowing the future of even like the immediate future. We didn't know what the next day was going to look like anymore. So it's great to have a film that was just, there was no way to know it was going to be as timely as it was.
Most definitely. And do you expect the film to stick with you in the months or years ahead, or do you think this is like a one-time watcher where you're like, it was just the right movie at the right time?
Well, I've watched it a couple of times now during the pandemic, and so I think it's going to stick with me. Again, zombies are actually not my favorite of the horror monsters. So the fact that I rewatched a zombie film more than once is actually already saying a lot. But it is so cool to see. And I really like Jeff Barnaby's style. He did a film a couple of years back called Rhymes for Young Ghouls. I always say Gowls because I'm from Oklahoma and we want to make that O sound weird all the time. But Rhymes for Young Ghouls. And so that film was a lot heavier, but it was still like, it's a thriller. It has a lot of gore again, but it's a little bit more drama based, while this one is more genre film, with the great special effects and kind of a sci-fi twist with the zombies. And so I have a feeling I'll rewatch it a couple more times, and then once Jeff Barnaby has the opportunity to make another film, I'll probably just start at the beginning again with Rhymes for Young Ghouls, and then do Blood Quantum, and then the new one, and just kind of like let it build on top of each other.
Yeah. Rewatch the whole oeuvre of films before the next release. I do that with Rian Johnson films as well. Pretty much anytime he's got a new one coming out, I'm like, all right, let's go back to Brick and then power our way through. So, well, listeners, that film is Blood Quantum. All right, Shea, well, let's go ahead and move on to your second film. What is the next film that you selected for us today?
So this goes back to where I mentioned Star Wars. So one of my favorite movies I'm going to say all time, and this is going to sound really ridiculous, but is Rogue One. So that's my second choice, is Rogue One.
The world is coming undone. Imperial flags reign across the galaxy.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We've a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
If you're really doing this, I want to help.
It's so good.
I'd love to elaborate here. I mean, we could literally talk. We could probably talk for hours about Star Wars. So I'll have to keep it short. But at the same time, I really want to hear exactly the why and the rationale. Fill me in here. What exactly about Rogue One sticks out to you? You know, layer one as a Star Wars film, what do you think sets it apart from the rest? But also part two, as you said, one of the best films ever made. So like what about it makes it one of the greatest films, or at least one of your favorite films?
So Rogue One, I've always had like a really deep connection to Star Wars. I kind of lost it as I got older. And then Rogue One was kind of what brought me back in, because hot take, I didn't love the whole Rey series. I thought they were fine, and I knew that if I was younger, I would have loved them, because it's really just reviving a lot of the same story for a new generation. And I know while Disney is not thinking of the kids first, they're thinking of money first, and that idea, it's so great to see young kids going to Disney World or on Halloween and dressing up as characters and having the same interest in it in the same way that I did with Padme when I was younger. So I love, love, love that. But they just didn't hit me on an emotional level. But Rogue One did, because it gives a backstory. And as a writer, I love having layers on layers and development of motivation and all of that. So I loved how it filled in this blank that I didn't even realize was there between, really before the first one in quotes, because that's when Leia, is getting the Death Star plans and all of that. But it just fit so nicely, and just the creativity there was beautiful. And then, obviously a spoiler. So if you have not listened to Rogue One, I do not recommend you listen to what I'm about to say. But the idea that these, like, I wrote a piece on Rogue One, and this is way before the pandemic, about why I loved it. And I called them like a ragamuffin crew, because you have these people that really don't fit together that do in the film, who are so dedicated to bringing down the bad guys that they're willing to die for it. And I loved that hint of darkness in Star Wars, because it's always been there. It just hasn't been as outright there until Rogue One. And so that ending really crushed me. But it also, again, it brings up so much emotion when it comes to sacrifice and this idea of what people have done in order for other generations to have a better life. And so that really hit me. And that's why I think it's one of the best Star Wars films. Like, and I say that as someone who's like, yeah, okay, the special effects and like the cinematography are good, but they're, probably better in other movies. But the writing of that one really got me. And I'm also a huge Diego Luna fan. So I really love Diego Luna. So that also helped my case there. So every time I watch the movie and Cassian comes on for the first time, I say something. Like, it differs each time, but I'm just like, oh my God. Or, oh, look, if I'm with my fiance, I'm like, why don't you look like that? Which is really mean. But at this point, he's used to it, because he knows that that's like my guy is Diego Luna. So it's kind of been my comfort film for a while. And that's why during the pandemic, if I was feeling a little sad, and reality shows weren't quite hitting that sadness anymore, I would turn on Rogue One. It's always just a safe film for me.
Definitely. I mean, I have to ask now, it sounds like you're pretty jazzed about the upcoming Disney Plus series, or will you get your weekly helping of Diego Luna? Yes?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. I am so excited that if I have to admit, like, the whole postponing the Cassian series has really disappointed me. And for a while, it was rumored that they were going to cancel it. And then, I watched a lot. Like, I don't do this for anyone else, so this is not like, I'm not a total like nerd, but I kind of am. Where anytime like Diego does late night TV shows, I like watch the clips the next day. And he's been in London, and that's where they shoot Star Wars stuff. So he was talking a little bit about it, but they can't get into much detail. But the fact that he's in London shooting it, I'm like, we're getting it soon. I don't care if soon is like a year, because that's soon enough. But I'm so excited. I have people already that are like, you're going to do like a weekly podcast about it, right? Or they're like, people are already like contacting me about doing Diego Luna content, which I might if I have the time. but I just, I'm a big Diego Luna fan. So yeah.
Noted. Firstly, you should absolutely do a podcast on it. Secondly, I will probably at some point talk about it on this podcast. So you're always welcome to join. I'll have to make sure to issue an invitation once we get a release date. A lot of people, not on the series in particular, but a lot of people talk about Star Wars as being a really big, like, foundational block of, their film going journey. But I don't hear a lot of people talk about the new ones as much because it's so fresh in everyone's mind. But I think like that Rogue One, I really do wonder, like, kind of like what you're talking about here, if that sentiment might be more common even in like 5 to 10 years. Just because I know that I had some coworkers and some friends who say, yeah, Rogue One is my daughter's favorite Star Wars movie, and her daughter's like 10 or 11 or something. So it's really exciting. And I think too, it's only going to open up the opportunities for even more Star Wars stories. Great selection. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to your final selection today. What is the last movie that comes to mind when you think about getting through, the year full of unprecedented times or the new normal?
So this was hard because I wanted to pick a film that captured. I went through a big stage in November where I was watching a lot of film noirs and neo noirs. Again, that's where you get a lot of your basis for even horror films today, because it's that building of suspense. And so I love film noirs. So one that I had not seen until this November, and it has stuck with me since, is Leave Her to Heaven.
What shall be done with a jealous woman?
Jacques Dunchill. If you were having the baby, you'd love it. Well, I never wanted it. Richard and I never needed anything else. Now this.
How can you say such wicked things?
Sometimes the truth is wicked.
The starring roles of Jean Tierney long ago revealed her as an incomparable dramatic artist. But in the part of Ellen in Leave Her to Heaven, she gives one of the truly great dramatic performances of our time. Of the devastatingly beautiful Ellen, it was said, she would cheat, lie, deceive, stop at nothing to make the man she loved her exclusive possession. With matchless dramatic power and romantic appeal, Cornel Wilde surpasses all his previous triumphs. As Richard Harlan, he fights his mad desire to marry Ellen.
Now look here, Ellen.
Darling, will you marry me?
Why, you unpredictable little...
So that is my third film, is Technicolor genius film, just a drop-dead, femme fatale who is insane. And I say that as probably as medically accurate as possible. But that film blew me away. And I was surprised that after being such a big film noir fan, I had somehow missed it all these years. So that one is, it was a lot, but I love it.
So I'm just curious, is this a film that you have been wanting to watch you've been wanting to watch for a while? Has it been kind of like in your queue for a long time? And do you expect to rewatch it again in the future?
Definitely rewatch. I love Technicolor. I love bright films. And usually you don't get that with film noir. But this film is shot in Technicolor. So, the reds and the blues and the greens are just incredible. And you also have a really great Vincent Price cameo that is not you kind of know him as the narrator or the scary guy. And he's not that in this film at all. So to have just all these different kind of obscure, these elements that are kind of out of their normal in a film noir, and it be as great as it is, the content's a little dark like most film noirs, but the beauty of the look and the cinematography on top of the colors and the wardrobe, and oh my gosh, I will definitely be revisiting it because it is incredible, pretty in every single way you can think of.
It sounds like a recipe for a good time. I mean, you mentioned a Vincent Price cameo. You've already got me there, but the Technicolor, the noir, this sounds like one not to miss. So I'm certainly going to add it to my list. Listeners, the 3 films that Shea brought for us today are Blood Quantum, Rogue One, and Leave Her to Heaven. Okay, Shea, so we're heading towards the conclusion of our conversation today, but what I do like to do, just for fun, on the last round, I am going to start a timer here, and I'll tell you when we're starting, but I want to give you a rapid fire round where you have 90 seconds to talk about, and it doesn't have to be movies, you can actually step outside of movies, you can talk about TV shows, you could talk about comic books, you could talk about you're going to school, could even be textbooks, or a writer, could be music. Like, what are some of the other works of art or fiction or just media that you've consumed in the pandemic that helped you get through it?
All right, I'm ready.
All right, we're going to start the timer now.
Okay, so Crooked Hallelujah by Kelly Jo Ford is a novel that came out in July. I'm currently working through my second read of it right now, but it follows 3 generations of Cherokee women in southern, or maybe it is even northeastern Oklahoma and Texas, and it's just, it's incredible. So that's definitely one. I've been listening to a lot of Belle and Sebastian because, I need a lot of melancholy music right now, and that has been my go-to. When it comes to television shows, I tried to watch Narcos. Honestly, couldn't get through it. I didn't think the writing was very great. But Pedro Pascal was great, which leads me into The Mandalorian. Watched all of that. Have watched it several times. Again, just a great show to turn on if you're a Star Wars fan when you need something to watch. Again, Jersey Shore, Dance Moms, Catfish. I've watched all of those. And 90 Day Fiance is the only show I watch on a weekly basis, which is, again, I should not, reality TV is not wonderful. I am now a consumer of it. So I'm embarrassed by that. Podcasts, my roommate has a podcast called Cherokee Word for Movies that she does with her sister. That's really great. And I actually was just a guest on there. So, because again, I love talking. So I listen to that podcast. And
we're at time. Wow, that was perfect. You hit it right on the head. 90 seconds.
Okay.
Well, you made it, Shea. Those are some great recommends. It's funny, you're not the only person I've talked to who has said 90 Day Fiance has become a pandemic thing. I have never heard of that show until this past year. I think I've had 5 or 6 people bring it up. So it is in the zeitgeist. There it is.
Oh my gosh.
Shea, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. For our listeners out there who really enjoyed the conversation, where can they keep up with you and your work online?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to find me on really any social media that I'm active on. It's just and then Shea, Shea, Vassar, Vassar. I try to keep it consistent on all social media for that reason.
All right. That's some quality branding. It took some of us way too long to get to that point to think to use the same handle for every channel. So check her out there, ladies and gentlemen. Shea, it's been great talking to you, getting to hear a little bit about your year. And again, just tremendous work on being able to pitch some of those stories as many times as you talked about. And I'm really excited. It sounds like 2021, knock on wood, fingers crossed, is shaping up to be a good year for you. Before we close out, is there anything else you would like to say about these 3 films or how people can best support your work?
If anybody watches those films or has comments and wants to reach out to me, I'm not always the best at getting back to people on social media, but I eventually do. So that's always, I'm always fine with film conversation. And then for supporting work, again, just, if you're on Twitter and you retweet a writer's work, that always helps reach new people and new audiences. So not just for me, but for any of us struggling journalists, freelancers, retweeting or sharing work anywhere with your friends or family. If you enjoy it or you think of someone, it's always just a great thing. So.
Awesome. Well, Shea Vassar, writer, filmmaker, and host of the Hardcourt Honeys podcast. Thanks so much for joining the Cinematic Schematic today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to part 6 of our ongoing series on 3 films that got you through the 2020 pandemic with today's special guest, Shea Vassar. Stay tuned to hear who we'll be talking with next week. Now, I do want to remind you, listeners, if you would like to participate and be heard in this particular series, please consider sending in your 3 films that got you through the pandemic to our email address, thecinematropolis@gmail.com. Send us your picks for a chance to be heard on the show. Now, if you enjoyed today's conversation, another way that you can support us is by rating the podcast and subscribing on your preferred podcast app. You can also follow all of our work here at The Cinematropolis by following us on Twitter at The Cinematrop or on Facebook at facebook.com/The Cinematropolis. And you can also find more of my work by following me on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That is letter C, Masters Talk. Join me next week when I talk with the host and producer of the Tunes podcast, and what I would say is one of the true pop culture content creator gems of the Southwest region, Harold Story. I'll talk with Harold about his 3 film selections, as well as how the pandemic impacted his work as a podcaster. You won't want to let this conversation slide on by. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. We'll catch you again next time.